Good morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Friday, November 13th, 2020. I am Dave Biddle. I am very happy to be joined by Jonah Booker for his usual Friday visit. It would be a better Friday visit if we were talking about a game tomorrow, Jay Book, like we thought we would. Ohio State and Maryland, of course, canceled. News came down yesterday. Just your reaction when you saw that news yesterday.
Yeah, just very disappointed. Feel bad for Ohio State. You know, going into the season, we were lucky to see some football. You always thought that there was a chance for a while. For the first couple of weeks, it was looking like Ohio State was dodging a couple bullets as far as being able to get their games in. Just looking at the Maryland boards, they were actually really surprised how fast that popped up with their team, especially that many players coming off a game in Penn State where there was hardly any noise that someone may have tested positive. So for Ohio State, it's very disappointing. Hopefully, fingers crossed, they can finish out the rest of the season. I think that the Big Ten and Kevin Warren, because they messed this thing up from the start, is left zero wiggle room for any teams, and I think this is something to look at, because I don't know how the playoff committee is going to be able to do a fair assessment on who should be in the actual tournament, because you look at all across the country, major games are being canceled left and right. There's, the virus is starting to creep up all across the country. I don't think this is going to be the end of a lot of these games being canceled, unfortunately.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like this will be the last one. That's for sure. We're getting the numbers are getting worse, not better, and I think it would be a fool's errand to think this is going to be the last one. And I'll just skip ahead to that. I was going to ask you another question that I'll get to in a moment, but I want to get into right now. The Big Ten's rule is you have to play 6 games, at least 6 games minimum, to be eligible for the Big Ten championship game. That means Ohio State can only afford to miss one game after this one, have one more game canceled after this one. Wisconsin's already got their backs to the wall. They can't have any more games canceled or they're not eligible unless the Big Ten revisits that rule. I had a chance to ask Ryan Day during his really quick press conference yesterday with the media about that, if he thinks the Big Ten will revisit that rule. He says he hopes they will if it comes to that, but he hasn't given it much thought. He hopes that it won't come to that, but he's basically said if it turns out Ohio State's only able to play like 5 games, that he hopes the Big Ten will revisit that rule like they did with the false positive rule. For those that are out there wondering, well, won't the Big Ten just be stubborn and dig their heels in and they won't change the rule? Well, I've been very critical of the Big Ten. I know Jay Book has as well, but to their credit, I guess they went back on the false positive rule, meaning if like if a guy like Justin Hilliard has the antigen test and test positive, turns out they prove it's a false positive, he's still allowed to play in the game now, which he was not allowed to play against Penn State. So a lot of build up there, Jay Book, but hopefully they will revisit this 6-game rule. What do you think about that?
I'm hoping so. I mean, it right now in Ohio State, I would definitely say it's a point to start being concerned, because if you look at Ohio State, they are doing everything right within the program. If they're having to miss games because of other teams checking out and players not really following the protocols, how can you penalize Ohio State, especially your top horse in the conference there, who has a shot to win the national championship? If Ohio State is left out of the Big Ten championship because of someone else's problems, then to me that's going to fall heavy on the Big Ten. The good news for Ohio State fans is I don't think the playoff committee will necessarily penalize the Buckeyes, because everyone knows this is one of the top 4 teams, top to bottom, in the conference, or I'm sorry, in the country. You cannot leave Ohio State out of the playoffs because of Maryland guys deciding that they want to go and celebrate the Penn State game, if you to believe the Maryland message boards, or if someone else has things that pop up. You can't penalize Ohio State. It's going to be the Big Ten willing to admit that they once again made another mistake. If you're looking at a situation where Indiana and Northwestern are playing in the Big Ten championship instead of Ohio State, it's a ratings disaster. Who's really going to turn into that game? And then you have a situation where Indiana beats Northwestern or something, and they're in the undefeated talk, and you have Ohio State just sitting there waiting to play games. I just think that they have to revisit it. It doesn't make a lot of sense not to. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if the Big Ten makes a lot more concessions here, especially when things start to look bad, if it's really going to hurt Ohio State.
The other interesting topic here is whether or not Maryland should have been forced to forfeit instead of it being a no contest where it just gets canceled and the game just disappears. If Maryland should have been forced to forfeit, and people might say, well, that's unfair. And I kind of come down on that side of the ledger that would be unfair to Maryland. But then again, when you look deeper at this, though, this was not the Big Ten canceling it because there was an outbreak at Maryland. This was Maryland saying they wanted to cancel the game. To my understanding, unless new positive tests have popped up, Maryland met the Big Ten's threshold. Like they were under the threshold. They could have played the game if they wanted to. And they decided that they were going to cancel the game. Just what's your opinion about that? Do you think Maryland should have been forced to forfeit?
I mean, this also falls in line with our conversation that we had about Wisconsin several weeks ago, where at the time Wisconsin canceled the game and they didn't meet the Big Ten standard to cancel. So to me, I want to see if further results come back and if it's a mass outbreak at Maryland like you saw at Wisconsin. But my initial standing is if you're canceling the game and you haven't been required to cancel the game, to me, that should be a forfeit. But if you're looking at a situation where an entire position group was wiped out and you can't field an offensive line, then I can see where the argument would be that they had to cancel the game. But we haven't heard any inkling that that is the situation. It's just, hey, we have some positive tests. We want to cancel the game. Boom, game's canceled. So I want to see if there's further details that comes out that you're talking about over a dozen guys testing positive or a position group being wiped out. But right now, where things stand, I would say in my mind, it's not fair to Ohio State to have to be able to sit at home this Saturday when Maryland's canceling the game when they didn't necessarily have to, according to the Big Ten guidelines.
Coach Day was very diplomatic when asked about it yesterday on the call. He handled it like a pro, like he always does. He basically, reading between the lines, kind of said, there should be some conversation there, especially when, it's Maryland deciding to cancel, not the Big Ten deciding to cancel, as you said. And but he was very diplomatic about it. He said he has so much on his plate. He's just focusing on football. They didn't find out until like the last minute, right before practice on Wednesday, that this was going down. He said he doesn't have time to think about this. So he said Gene Smith and Dr. Johnson, Dr. Christina Johnson, are the ones that are handling all of that stuff. But reading between the lines, you can kind of tell that he feels like it should be a forfeit was the way that I read him. A couple more things will get you out of here. I was curious, Jay Book, what they were going to do this weekend. If they were going to kind of treat this, not that they knew it was going to be a bye week since they've been preparing for Maryland for half the week. But I was curious if Coach Day was going to give his players the weekend off. But no, and not allow them to go back home or anything, but just kind of let them rest. They are going to practice on Saturday. They're going to continue practicing. They're going to have a walkthrough later today. Obviously, it's not going to be a walkthrough like they're playing Maryland, more of like a walkthrough of getting ready to play Indiana. And they are going to practice tomorrow on Saturday. He wants to keep them, as he said, as much on a regular schedule as possible. And after talking to him, that makes sense. I kind of thought he would give them Saturday off, but they're going to practice on Saturday, and that makes sense to me. Just your thoughts on that.
I agree. You just treat it as a bye week here. And this Saturday, if they're going to practice, this is the time to start really ironing out the kinks for Indiana next week, which is going to be the prime time game that everyone's going to be watching because it's pretty much going to decide the Big Ten East championship. So get as many practice reps in as you can. The one thing that I 100% agree with Ryan Day is it's something to be worried about having these guys, loose on the weekend because the message has been pounded in them. Do not put yourself or this program or this season at risk. If you're going to go and associate with other people because you have the weekend off, then that's something to be worried about. So they're trying to keep those guys as buttoned down as much as possible, even though they don't have a game, which is smart because there's still a lot of at stake right now, and especially next week. The Big Ten championship is still on the line, and a shot at Clemson for a national championship is still on the line. So just because you got the weekend off doesn't mean that a lot of people won't be impacted if you don't make the right decisions.
Last thing, let's look back on the Rutgers game real quick. Buckeyes get up 35-3 at halftime. They coast to the finish. Rutgers outplayed them in the second half. Buckeyes win that game 49-27. They were favored by 39. Again, they're up by 32 at halftime, end up winning the game only by 22. Just your thoughts on how the Buckeyes looked against Rutgers. Did you feel like the first half was more indicative of what we're going to see from Ohio State, or the second half, or just your overall thoughts on that game?
Yeah, just over the last 2 weeks, you're seeing an Ohio State team that knows they're vastly more talented than their opponents. They're blowing Rutgers out. It's late at night in the shoe. There's no crowd there, a dead atmosphere, and complacency kicked in. And Ryan Day would tell you that the guys didn't play up to their standards in the second half there, and the human nature says we are so much better than Rutgers. We're blowing them out at halftime. They're thinking some of these younger guys are going to start getting in here to get a little bit of playing time, and they let the foot off the gas. And that is something that Ryan Day will definitely have to preach to these guys: is you are competing until the whistle stops, until the clock says zero, because you only have so many games to really showcase what you can do. And to me, you can't let that complacency creep in. You want to be able to start playing your best football as we head into December, and that is 4 quarters, not just the first half. You have to be playing your best football all 4 quarters heading into December, which is championship football time. So just getting those bad habits knocked out of them will be something of a challenge for Day going forward, because like I said, there's so much more talented than everyone else that they're going to play, that a lot of times this team has to find a way to stay motivated. And when you have a late at night and dead environment, when you're up 30 points at halftime, the complacency kicked in. But I'm not worried about it. I truly believe this team, they will get going. I trust Ryan Day and his staff to make sure that complacency doesn't kick in with this football team. So it's a matter of just challenging themselves and keeping focused, because at the end of the day, there's a big championship prize to be played for, and you want to be playing your best football heading into the later part of this year.
A 13-minute show here on Friday the 13th seems fitting. Thanks very much to Jonah Booker. I appreciate it, Jay Book, and thank you to all the listeners out there for tuning into the show. Hope everyone has a great weekend. Have a great one, Bucknutters.